What could drive two great empires to war? Gold? Land? Power? Or could it be something smaller, something grotesque, floating in silence, preserved in a jar? Could a single ear, cut from a man no one had ever heard of, truly ignite years of bloodshed? Or was it all just a convenient excuse for nations already drunk on pride? It begins not with cannons, but with salt and silence. The creak of wood under the Caribbean sun. The British brig. Rebecca drifts across calm waters near the coast of Florida. The crew wipes sweat from their faces, unaware that they're about to become part of something absurd. From the horizon, a Spanish patrol ship. No warning shots, no words exchanged, only shouting, chaos, and blades drawn. The Spanish board the vessel, accuse the British of smuggling, and begin their inspection. At least, that's the polite word for it. Among the crew, one man is pulled forward, Captain Robert Jenkins. He protests, but the Spanish officer only smiles. They search his ship, find nothing of value, and decide that humiliation will be enough. They tie him down. They call him a pirate, a liar, an enemy of the crown. And then, without ceremony, they slice off his ear. He screams, but the waves drown the sound. Blood stains the deck. The Spanish officer lifts the ear, dripping with sweat and salt, and says, "Take this to your king, and tell him we'll do the same to him if he dares to do the same." It's 1731. And on that humid day in the Caribbean, the British Empire gains a future martyr it never asked for and barely cared about. Jenkins survives. He returns to Britain. He carries with him that tiny, obscene trophy, his ear, pickled in a jar, and no one cares. The Admiralty ignores him. The politicians shrug. The newspapers have better stories. The empire moves on. Because one man's pain means nothing when there's no profit in it. Years pass. The world forgets Robert Jenkins. But politics has a strange memory. It forgets names but remembers opportunities. By the late 1730s, Britain and Spain are choking on an uneasy peace. The Treaty of Utrecht had ended a long war, but it solved nothing. Spain controls most of the New World, its ports bursting with silver and sugar. Britain wants a share of that wealth. Officially, it's forbidden. Unofficially, everyone cheats. British merchants smuggle goods into Spanish colonies. Spanish guards seize ships, confiscate cargo, and inspect whatever they please. Both sides accuse the other of piracy, and both sides are right. It's not war, it's business. Until someone decides that business isn't enough. In London, merchants are furious. They claim Spanish coast guards abuse British sailors. They demand action, compensation, pride. But what they really want is access to trade, to money, to power. And the quickest path to that is war. Still, a war needs a reason. Something emotional, something the public can hate, something bloody enough to print. And somewhere in the archives of Parliament, someone remembers a name. Jenkins. In 1738, 7 years after that forgotten day at sea, Robert Jenkins is summoned before the House of Commons. He stands in the middle of the chamber, pale, quiet, bewildered. He's not a hero. He's just a sailor dragged into politics. But the men around him are hungry. They ask him to tell his story, to show the ear, to feed the outrage. He does. He lifts the jar. Inside floats a dry, twisted piece of flesh, a relic of his humiliation. Some say he cries. Others say he stays silent. It doesn't matter which is true. What matters is the silence that follows, and then outrage. Cries of honor and revenge echo through Parliament. Papers print stories of Spanish cruelty, each one bloodier than the last. The ear becomes a symbol of empire, of pride, of vengeance. An entire nation rallies around something that once fit in the palm of a hand. Even Jenkins doesn't understand what's happening. He's paraded through the streets as a victim, a patriot, a man who suffered for his country. He doesn't speak much. Maybe because he knows the truth. He didn't suffer for his country. He suffered because two empires couldn't stop lying to themselves. Outside Parliament, London burns with anger. Merchants fund pamphlets demanding war. Cartoonists draw Spain as a monster, tearing British sailors apart. Crowds shout in taverns that the king must defend his people. The war drums beat faster every week. Inside Parliament, one man stands against the tide, Prime Minister Robert Walpole. For 20 years, he's kept Britain out of unnecessary wars. He knows how they start, with lies, with pride, with applause, and how they end, with debt and graves. He warns them, nothing but calamity can come from this, but no one listens. Reason never wins against spectacle. As one historian would later write, it was not Jenkins's ear that declared war. It was Britain's ego. And yet, Walpole yields. He's called weak, cowardly, unpatriotic. The opposition mocks him. The public wants blood, and even the king begins to waver. So, on October 23rd, 1639, Robert Walpole signs what he swore he never would, a declaration of war against Spain. The crowd outside celebrates. They cheer for Jenkins, for vengeance, for Britain's honor. The bells of London ring with pride. Walpole watches from his office and mutters, "They are ringing the bells now. They will soon be wringing their hands." He's right. The war begins in the Caribbean, the place where Jenkins first bled. Dozens of British ships set sail under Admiral Edward Vernon. Their mission: punish Spain, capture its ports, destroy its fleet. They dream of gold, glory, and easy victories. Their first target, Portobello, on the coast of Panama. The assault begins in November 1739. 6 British ships approach the Spanish fortress. Cannons thunder. Smoke covers the bay. For a moment, it works. The Spanish surrender. London explodes with celebration. Vernon becomes a hero overnight. Songs are written about him. Plays are staged. Taverns are renamed Portobello Arms. Even George Washington's half-brother names his Virginia estate Mount Vernon after him. The empire believes it's winning, but victories built on pride rarely last. A year later, Vernon attacks Cartagena, one of Spain's greatest strongholds. 60 ships, 12,000 men. It's supposed to be easy. Instead, it's a disaster. The harbor defenses are stronger than expected. The Spanish fight with ferocity. Disease spreads. Heat kills more than cannon fire ever could. By the end, half the army is dead or dying. British soldiers rot in tropical graves, forgotten by the country that sent them. Back home, the same newspapers that demanded war now print excuses. The same crowds that cheered Jenkins' name now look away. And Robert Jenkins himself. No one knows where he is. He vanishes from public life, a man erased by the myth that used him. Still watching? Then you're one of the few who actually listens beyond the noise. Subscribe, and you'll never see history the same way again. The war drags on, pointless and aimless. Both sides claim victory. Both sides lose men, money, and time. The Caribbean becomes a graveyard of ambition. The British fleet limps home, and the public's appetite for revenge turns to silence. Jenkins, somewhere in obscurity, lives out his life quietly. He never profits from his fame, never speaks of the ear again. He watches as politicians who used his story retire rich, while sailors like him return maimed or never return at all. And yet, the phrase, "the War of Jenkins Ear," stays. A joke, a headline, a piece of trivia in textbooks. People laugh at the absurdity that men killed and died because of a jarred ear. But behind that laughter lies something darker, because the truth is, wars don't need grand reasons. They only need people willing to pretend there is one. An empire doesn't go to war for an ear. It goes to war for distraction, for profit, for pride. The ear just makes the story easier to sell. When the war finally fades, it leaves nothing but irony in its wake. Thousands dead, fortunes wasted, and an empire that learned nothing. History moves on. The heir disappears, perhaps lost, perhaps thrown away. Jenkins dies in obscurity. And the same parliament that turned him into a symbol never mentions his name again. Years later, Britain and Spain will fight again, this time on a larger stage. The so-called War of Jenkins Ear will be absorbed into another conflict, the War of Austrian Succession, another chapter of greed disguised as destiny. But its beginning remains unique, not for its victories, but for its absurdity. A severed ear, a desperate government, a public too eager to believe it mattered. That's how history works. It doesn't need heroes, it just needs symbols, and people willing to die for them. Empires fall for many reasons: poverty, corruption, betrayal. But most often, they fall because they start believing their own propaganda. The British called it honor. The Spanish called it justice. History calls it something else: stupidity with a flag. And so, centuries later, the story of Robert Jenkins remains what it always was. A reminder that behind every patriotic speech, there's a salesman. Behind every war, a convenient excuse. And behind every noble cause, a man who didn't get to choose his part in it. History doesn't always begin with a gunshot. Sometimes, it starts with an ear.